Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. First, the stories making headlines across the continent. Violence in Sudan continues unabated, while some paramilitary forces senior leaders are in Kenya with plans to launch its own government with various political parties. And while the conflict is about to enter its second year, the United Nations calls it the biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. We'll talk to our guest, Christopher Lockyer, Secretary General of Doctors Without Borders. And focus tonight on South Africa's education under pressure. Budget cuts are starting to impact education outcomes, shining light on inequality between private and public schooling. So we start in Sudan, where the latest violence has left more than 200 civilians dead. Recent attacks by the paramilitary rapid support forces that took place in a cluster of villages over 3 days. Meanwhile, some RSF senior leaders were in Kenya to announce plans to form a government with various political parties in areas still under its controls. Our correspondent in Nairobi, Elodie Cousin, has more.
It is in Nairobi that the Rapid Support Forces wanted to proclaim the formation of a parallel government following the dissolution of the civilian coalition led by former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok last week. The Rapid Support Forces, represented by Abdul Haim Adam Dagalo, brother of General Emeti and deputy leader of the paramilitaries, intended to announce a new coalition with political parties and civilians. However, after 2 hours of speeches, it was finally announced that the proclamation was postponed pending the arrival of new participants.
The preparatory committee plans to have a full-fledged program in the course of the 3 or 4 days until the 21st of February, where we will have the final session and where we will present to all of you here and to the world the new political charter and the constitutional document.
This event comes while the Sudanese army launched a major offensive on the capital Khartoum, regaining territory. It is impossible to say at this moment which political forces or civilian organizations will join the Rapid Support Forces. What we can say, however, is that the army will not participate at this initiative. The military and the army-aligned governments based in Port Sudan have made it clear that they disapprove of this move.
And at the heart of this conflict is a falling out between Sudan's army chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and his deputy-turned-rival, Mohamed Dagalo, who leads the RSF. Since the conflict broke out nearly 2 years ago, tens of thousands of people have since been killed and over 12 million displaced. The biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded, says the United Nations. Let's bring Christopher Lockyer. He's the MSF Secretary General. Thank you very much, Christopher, to join us. So 2 years on, what is the humanitarian situation today?
Yeah, well, I was in Sudan. I was on the Omdurman area of Khartoum just a few days ago. And as I was there was a shell hit a crowded market area. And the hotel that Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders is supporting in Khartoum received dozens and dozens and dozens of critically injured casualties. I counted 60 people waiting on the floor and in beds in the hospital for urgent treatment, and I saw the morgue in the hospital that was overflowing with dead bodies. This is just one small, in the grand scheme of things, illustration of the catastrophic humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in Sudan. There's this horrendous violence against civilians. There is acute levels of malnutrition. Around 50% of the population are suffering from acute levels of food insecurity and an epidemic of violence against women. So it really is an incredibly horrific humanitarian crisis that we're witnessing before our eyes.
And the United Nations just made an appeal asking for a $6 billion contribution to assist the population. So why such a staggering amount? What are the specific needs?
Well, there's no doubt that there needs to be a massive scale up of humanitarian assistance. The difference between the needs and the humanitarian response on the ground is huge. I mean, we're witnessing a global humanitarian failure in Sudan. And money is important in that equation, but it's a lot more than money that is needed. We need organizations, the international community and the UN to take politically brave steps to ensure that they're pushing against the restrictions and the complications of working in Sudan. We need to be protecting civilians. We need to be ensuring that the warring parties are permitting access for humanitarian organizations, and humanitarian organizations need to be ensuring that we are providing the assistance that is needed.
And you're representing Doctors Without Borders. So what kind of health issues do you have to deal with? You touch upon the situation of malnutrition.
Yeah, well, the health system has been critically affected through this horrendous war. I mean, in areas of conflict, the acute areas of conflict, there's up to 80% of the health facilities have been destroyed in an already underserved health system. And so we see a full range of needs. We ourselves have treated nearly 2,000 people for trauma-related surgeries. We have treated around 60,000 people for malnutrition-related needs. And so we are seeing across the spectrum a huge need for healthcare, and we are seeing healthcare installations, hospitals attacked and becoming part of the war. We had to suspend some of our activities in the Bashir hospital in Khartoum because of the violence within the hospital itself.
And a dire situation indeed, and we're still far from achieving a peace deal. Fighting, as I said earlier, continues between the paramilitary and the army forces. So do you communicate with any of those parties?
Yeah, wherever we work, Doctors Without Borders tries to communicate directly with the warring parties. We do that to talk about how we would like to work, to explain who we are, to try and negotiate access to the populations in the greatest need. And so we're in constant contact, or we try and be in constant contact with the warring parties for those reasons. And that can be a very complicated endeavor, because it also means that we're relying on them in terms of being able to pass messages through their troops, through their organization, to ensure our safety and to allow patients to access the health facilities that we're supporting.
And quickly, if you may, what do they say about the magnitude of the situation that they are responsible for?
Well, what I would say to this is that this is a war on people. This is a war on civilians. And this is one of the most tragic illustrations of this conflict as a whole. And I would implore everybody involved in this conflict to ensure that they are protecting the civilians, the most vulnerable people at the heart of this conflict, to ensure that we're reducing the impact on them and allowing them to receive the medical treatment that they so critically need.
Thank you very much, Christopher Lockyer from the MSF. Thank you very much. South Africa's grade 5 pupils, that's 10 to 11 years old children, have been ranked last out of 59 countries in maths and science in an international test. The results highlighted inequality between private and public schooling. And with budget cuts to the Department of Education, teachers fear that gap will get wider. This report by Tom Kennedy, Caroline Dumay and Stephen Carstens.
Morning Star.
Riverlands is a purely government-funded school. A flood last year meant there was no running water for 3 months, and play areas are unsafe from collapsed buildings.
Last year, the WCD cut 2,407 posts, teaching posts, and most of the schools lost educators. We lost one as well, which means that aside from being principal, I must now also teach full-time. So we don't obviously have the funding to appoint someone in that position to do the teaching because we don't get funds in from the parents and from the community.
Nevin is a former education inspector. While public schools achieve very low results, private schools achieve similar standards to in France. He takes us to a semi-private school in the same town that receives tuition fees to show us the difference in facilities. He says the inequality he saw was shocking.
I remember coming home and reflecting on my day and just reflecting on what just happened. Not having basic infrastructure of just having a toilet or clean water or just food to eat a day. That was absolutely shocking, and I believe it was just unfair to any learner that we can drive 5 minutes out of town where we are now and we can see that different contrast.
The South African government hosted an education summit with G20 partners, pledging to promote equality. The Basic Education Minister said she is raising the issue of underfunding of public schools with the Finance Minister.
We want to make sure that classroom sizes are kept small, at least in terms of the internationally recognized benchmark. We want to make sure that our learners are able to eat at school, make sure that our learners are able to have scholar transport. These things are important for poorer communities because these are the things that really affect whether or not children are able to achieve academic excellence or not.
Only 37% of South African children starting school go on to pass their matriculation exam.
And now to a bit of music. Queen Rima has emerged a winner of the 2025 edition of the Prix Découverte RFI. The Guinean singer's name was revealed by our partner radio station, Radio France International. The jury chaired this year by artists Angelique Kidjo and Soul Bang, among others. They selected a dancehall artist who was participating for the third time in the final. Let's listen to Queen Rima to conclude our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching.